Happy Thursday, happy Thursday. Missed you guys this week. I did not get a chance to get on Monday. Had sort of a very interesting day, fun-filled day, adventurous day. And I've been waiting to talk about this topic because I think it's so important. Today, I want to chat about, what happens when we don't speak about out loud or even admit to ourselves when we're hurting. And this is a very personal topic for me as well, because I think in our community, we are, I've talked about this in the past, the strong Black woman narrative that gets laid upon us, that sometimes we even internalize and take on. And even the strong Black man narrative as well, right? That gets taken on. In our community, we don't talk about when things are not working. And I think because in the past, we have been raised, we have been taught that we can't let anybody see us sweat. We have to be strong. Part of that is when we're in a world, in a world and institutions, especially, for those of us who might have been in corporate or who might have been in medicine, or have been in certain educational institutions, we're taught that if we express any kind of weakness, emotion, it's weakness. If we're anything other than happy, then we're unstable. And so what happens is then we take on this stoicism that gets hidden inside of this narrative. And it can really be damaging. Growing up, and I've shared this before in previous videos and previous lives, I was a child survivor, a child witness to domestic violence. And I had to get out of bed every day and go to school like nothing was happening. And smile and be happy. And that was, even though it wasn't outwardly said, there was the what goes on in this house stays in this house narrative, right? Even though it wasn't outwardly said, you got to keep your feelings inside. It was sort of an unspoken agreement. And I'm going to sort of sidebar here, a lot of times there are so many unspoken agreements that we have with ourselves, that we have with the people in our lives, the things that are not necessarily taught to us, but things that are learned by watching and listening to other conversations in our community. And they create these unspoken narratives and unspoken agreements inside of our community. So the whole stigma around mental health is there's sort of an unspoken agreement about talking about our pain. And I know that part of it is because of what's happened in the past when we have talked about our pain, either internally inside of our families, or externally inside of the culture that we live in, inside of our workplace, inside of, churches even. That whole, narrative is very real. So when I was I went to school every day, very depressed. And I could say that now. I didn't really know what it was. I just went to school as a child every day, very depressed. And that went on, and I never talked about it because, there was this unspoken agreement that we didn't talk about our pain. We were just supposed to push through, push forward, and push on. And I did that for many, many years. And then in residency, when things got very intense, I never spoke about the pain that was there, that deep depression. I used writing. I write poetry, and I used poetry for many years. I started writing at the age of 11, and that became an outlet. And honestly, I believe that's what saved my life as a child and adolescent growing up, and through college. Because as I look back on it, I was pretty depressed in college as well. And then there came a point where I didn't have time to write, and I disconnected from that outlet. And I was training in residency to be a family doctor, and I hit a wall. And I couldn't talk about it. And I tried to talk about it with my mom. And then there was that encouragement of the narrative. Oh, you just push through it. Just push through it. And of course, well-meaning, but that was just the narrative that she grew up with. And then I tried to talk about it with my dad, and he's like, "Oh, honey, you're strong. You'll get through it." Right. That was the narrative that he grew up with. And that's the way they saw me, because I'm a high achiever. And what happens is when we don't talk about our pain, we don't talk about what's hurting us. It's like a trash can being filled up. And if you imagine a trash can being filled up, eventually that trash can is going to overflow, and it's either explosive or it's implosive. And for me, it was implosive. And I remember, that evening, and I may have talked about this on previous live before, but I do remember that evening that I hit that wall, that I didn't want to wake up the next morning. Right. And so it really, for some of us, it leads to that implosiveness, and wanting to hurt oneself, especially when you feel isolated and alone and you're not talking about it with anyone, right? When you're not talking about it with the people who can really support you. It can lead to that implosiveness. It can lead to explosiveness. But then the other thing is it can be insidious. It can be insidious in the way that you're walking around, not talking about your feelings, and it's eating away at you. What a lot of people don't realize is that kind of stress, that kind of internal stress, whether it's emotional stress, whether it's emotional from racial stress, from work stress, from whatever, family stress, that kind of stress can cause inflammation in the body. And so not only does it affect us mentally, it affects us physically. And then we start getting things like at one level, indigestion, but also it can lead to heart attacks. It can lead to strokes. It can lead to cancer, because we're eating our emotions, and that causes dis-ease, dysfunction in the body. And so, and there's research around, people who, the level of stress and its correlation to certain cancers in the body. So it's important for us to really get that when we don't talk about our pain, even though it's something that we learn usually as children. We start by expressing ourselves, and then there's something that happens, that some message that we get that it's not okay to talk about what's hurting us. Sometimes we're expressive and we're allowed to be expressive as children, and then we get into a certain point in our lives and educationally, and we're taught that either by consequence or by the conversations around us, that it's not okay to be expressive. Or sometimes we're in relationships, we're in romantic relationships, and with our partners, where we feel like it's okay to let our hair down and to show our heart, we're met with a messaging, whether it's a verbal or nonverbal, or a consequence that tells us it's not okay to talk about our pain. But what I say is, if you don't talk about your pain, it will kill you eventually, one way or another. And that's a hard thing to hear. But we have to start learning ways, finding communities, finding committed listeners, finding safe spaces and safe people when we're hurting, to be able to talk about that pain. And it's whether it's small pain or big pain, because there's the spectrum of pain, right? I think another thing that happens, and I know that this happens because it happens with me, or it has happened with me, right? And it still does, and I still have to use the tools to remember that I can talk about pains big and small. Sometimes we minimize our pain. We minimize our pain. We talk about, we think that so many other people have it worse in the world, that our pain or what we're dealing with is not worth mentioning. But the thing about that is that little pain that we think is not worth mentioning, it adds up. It adds up. It stacks on top of each other, little by little. And when that pain stacks, it does become big. It does become big. So it's important to not minimize the discomfort that you're feeling, to not ignore the pain or minimize the pain that you're feeling. Because when we do that, when we eat even the little stuff that we eat, it sits in our bodies and it sits in our minds, and it impacts not only us, but it impacts the people around us. Let me tell you, my son, some of you have already met him. He's come into a couple of lives. My son is extremely empathic, meaning he can feel energies. He can feel emotions. And I'm learning this about him because he's my one and only. I'm learning this about him. And specifically, I'm learning it because when I'm not completely balanced, it affects his behavior pattern. And sometimes I don't even have to be outwardly expressing or outwardly saying anything or outwardly acting a different way. But if I wake up off, I notice that off behavior manifests in him before I even speak, right? And it happened earlier this week, Monday, which we had a fairly challenging day, and I can be 100% honest and 100% transparent that even though I live these tools, I live by these tools, I teach these tools, neuro-linguistic programming and the language of the unconscious mind, and I'm a coach and I do all of these things, right? But guess what? I'm still human and I still have human experience. Doesn't mean I don't feel. So, I had a very rough Sunday, Monday, emotionally. And I couldn't really even put my finger on why that was happening. But I just know that I felt off. I felt, emotional and just off kilter, some sadness. And like I said, I couldn't pull. I was trying to figure it out, and it was frustrating me that I couldn't figure out why. Cause, for me, it's like, if I can figure out why, I can do something about it. But sometimes you just have to be with the emotion, right? Sometimes you just have to be there. And so, I noticed, I woke up that way. I woke up and just kind of like off kilter. And my son, he was behaving out of character than from what he typically does. And we were having a struggle. I was emotionally not equipped. I wouldn't have the patience that I normally have with him. And he was just resisting me at every turn. And then at some point during the day, I think it was around lunchtime, maybe it was a little after lunch, he came to me and he said, "Mommy, I'm just having a really hard day. I'm just having a really tough day." And he said to me, "I'm just feeling a lot of emotions right now." And, it just really hit me like, wow. Number one, he was able to articulate that at 6, right? What a kiddo. But also, I had to step back and just love on him, right? And sometimes we have to do that with ourselves when we are feeling that kind of emotion. But then I had to go and I had to talk to someone and say, I'm not, and I didn't even know what the bad day was about, but I had to just call someone and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm having an emotionally tough day today," and just get it out. Just get it out there and have someone listen. And it helped to dissipate that. And so the next morning I was better and my son was better. And, I was able to love on him a lot more. My patience was a lot more expanded. And he said to me the next day, "Well, I'm still having a little bit of a hard day, but your hugs and kisses are making it better, making it an easier day for me." Of course, that was a heart mommy moment, right? So I share that with you to share that this holding on to our emotions or not, like ignoring them, being unwilling or feeling like unable to talk about them, suppressing them, it really has an impact not only on us long term, but it also has an impact on the people around us, and especially our children. They're such sensitive, energetic people. And so, what my invitation is to you is when you're feeling off, whether it's a little emotion or a big emotion, honor it. Honor it. And particularly if you think it's too little to talk about, that's the time to talk about it, because sometimes you don't always realize how deep the emotion goes, especially if you're used to suppressing it. If it's been a part of your makeup to not talk about when things are not going well, for you, or when you're feeling off, or when something is hurting you, if it's been a part of your makeup not to talk about it, or a part of your what's the word that I want to use? If it's been a part of your unconscious training to not talk about when things are hurting, then I invite you to begin to, number one, you can write it in a journal, but then find a safe person to be able to say, hey, I'm not doing well today. And the other thing is, when you have a person who says to you, well, man, you know, girl, you're strong, you can get through it. Cause this is something that for some of us who tend to be, who tend to carry that strong narrative, and whose family tends to always come to them. I'm one of those people who family tends to always come to them, seek them for counsel. If you're one of those people, then people always assume that you're going to be okay. And that's the most dangerous place to be, by the way, right? People always assume that you're going to be okay. But when a person says that to you, you can say back, that's not helping. I really just need someone to listen. And it's important to be able to say that. Like, you know, people always assume that because I'm XYZ that I'm going to be okay. And I've had to say that a couple of times to my family because, you know, it gives them a new view when you're able to express that to them. Like, no, really, no, I'm not okay in the moment. It doesn't mean you won't be okay, right? It just means in that moment, the more you can honor the emotions as they come, the more you can honor the thing that you're hurt by, or and the more you can be in communication with the people who are hurting you, or who you feel you are being hurt by, I should say, right? The more you can be in communication with them and let them know that it's not okay, that you're not okay with that interaction, the more you'll be freed, the more it'll free you up, right? And then you can deal with you can deal with whatever you need to deal with from that standpoint. Does that make sense? You could type "makes sense" in the comments if that makes sense for you. And so, that is, you know, what I wanted to bring today, is that, you know, there are the things that we don't talk about, and particularly the painful things that we don't talk about in our lives, big and small. And what we consider small sometimes is not small, right? Sometimes we minimize these things that are painful. And it's time for us to stop doing that. It's time for you to stop minimizing your pain, to stop keeping it in, and to find safe spaces and safe outlets to be able to talk to, and to create safe spaces and safe outlets to be able to talk about it. Ones that when you do talk about it, then it could produce an empowering outcome, right? So if that's, whether that's a committed listener, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coach, right? Whatever it is, we want to find those safe space to be able to do that. All right. And of course, you know, if you feel like you need to be able to do that deep work, and you have some emotions that are stuck that you need letting go of, then you're welcome to reach out to me. And you can do that by either messaging me directly right here on Instagram, or you can go to remapmymind.com, and there you can book a complimentary call for right from the home page. You can book a complimentary call right from the home page. And if you are a person who provides mental health services or provides coaching, and you want to learn how to be able to provide these deeper unconscious mind types of tools to your clients, and you want to learn neurolinguistic programming, you want to learn hypnosis, then we do have early registration has just started for our next training in July, and one in September as well. So you can also, again, book a free interest call with me right from the homepage, remapmymind.com, or you can reach out to me here on Instagram. All right. So your charge for today is to look at what are you minimizing? What pain are you minimizing? What pain are you not talking about? And why? Is it that you don't have a safe space? Is it because you haven't, you didn't, recognize that you were minimizing it? Is it because you haven't found that outlet yet? What is the reason that you're still holding on to that pain, that you haven't started to talk about that yet? And then the second charge for you is to find that safe space. Find the safe space. Like I said, whether it's a committed listener, if it's a family member, if it's a friend, if it's a therapist, if it's a coach, find that safe space so that you can begin to let go of this dis-ease that's happening. Because believe me, it will impact you one way or another, and it will impact the people around you. All right. So, we just released a podcast, Remap Your Mind, this week. You'll see it in the post. And we talk about, with Dr. Omolara Umadimo, the strong Black woman narrative and how it's hurting us. So if you ever identified with that, you should check that podcast out. It's a really, really fun and great and deep conversation. And we'll be having more of those coming up. I'll be talking with mental health professionals and entrepreneurs and, our regular, people in this world who deal with stuff, but who are willing to have those deep conversations and give those deep insights around, empowering our mindset. Because the bottom line is, if we don't do the deep work, then we'll never move forward as a people. So as a culture, as people, as a nation, as all of that, right? But particularly, we want to begin to start with us, okay? As a community. Okay, that's it. That's all for today. I'll see you next week. The topic I was going to talk about Monday, maybe I'll push it to next week. But it was good to be back and good to be with you all. And I look forward to seeing you on the next live. Namaste, y'all.